What is going on with European river cruising and in fact river cruising worldwide? What do you need to know? What's the latest update? Will ships sail? What should you be doing? I'm Gary Bembridge and I'm going to delve into river cruising in this update. I've had loads and loads of people that watch the channel asking for more frequent updates around river cruising. So here we go. Before any river cruising can happen, the advice against river cruising actually has to be lifted. So if in the United States, for example, the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends currently do not go river cruising. They updated their guidance to focus on cruise travel, and they said, I'm going to quote here, they recommend that all people avoid travel on cruise ships, including river cruise ships worldwide, because the risk of COVID-19 on cruise ships is very high. Now in the UK, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, the FCO, they actually advise citizens, of course it's illegal to travel at all abroad until at least May, and when they did have advice around cruising, river cruising was actually not included in general cruising. You were allowed to go river cruising. So before anything can happen, the country you live in has to specifically lift the advice against not only travel, but also against river cruising. So that's the most important thing as you look and plan. The second thing I'm asked is, when will the actual cruises resume themselves? The simple answer is nobody actually knows, though there's a couple of really key things to note. The River Cruise Europe industry meeting was held virtually, has around 30 of the river cruise line and ports involved. They had a meeting recently and it revealed a lot. Basically what it said is they're hopeful rather than optimistic at this stage for an early startup. They actually see 2021 as a transition year after the total wipeout of 2020 and when they think will be a major return in 2022. Most said they're not expecting to return all their fleet into service, and most of them are expecting about half of their ships to sail this year, but it all hinges on which travellers they cater for. The current start dates for many of them range anywhere from April to June. Now the lines that cater for European passengers think they will be able to start before June. So things like Amber Waterways, Crossy Europe, they're expecting to start fairly early. Why? Because they cater for EU passengers, which despite the relatively slow rollout of vaccines in Europe, people are still going to be expected to be able to travel pretty easily and freely around the different parts of the European Union, and particularly in the Schengen zone, although there are some restrictions currently. So those lines like Crossy Europe, like Arosa, and other much more specific lines, catering say for German or Swiss passengers, they are expecting to be able to start cruising on the rivers relatively soon. The reason being they fall pretty much within the regulations around hotels. So as hotels can open, they're also more likely going to be able to open as well. Now lines who cater mostly for international guests, they are going to rely on the EU, first of all, changing the travel policy to let travellers come in free with no quarantining. So we're seeing things like move to May, but most of them to June. So Crystal, Emerald, Scenic, TUI, Avalon, Viking, they've all set their resumption at the moment to June, and they see vaccines as absolutely fundamental to opening up. Many of them rely on passengers coming from the United States and from the UK, and of course the vaccine rollout is moving very fast in the UK and pretty fast as it seems in the United States. So they're working on the assumption that those passengers, of course they tend to be slightly older, who go on river cruises, are going to be vaccinated, keen to go, and are likely to be able to go. There is an assumption that they're making that either the airlines or the countries in Europe are going to make vaccination a requirement. And that's really important to note, because the European Union has just recently agreed that they are going to introduce what they call a digital green passport, which will include things like test results and vaccination status. And they're going to use this to first of all allow people to move fairly freely within Europe, but importantly to allow third countries outside the EU, so that's like the UK, the US, and eventually I guess Australia and New Zealand as they open up, to actually come into the EU. So it does seem that vaccination is going to be key, and the river cruise lines are assuming that vaccines will be fundamental to their ability to open and the timing to open. So at the moment, many of those have June as the date. However, the EU is saying they're unlikely to have that green passport launched for another couple of months, so that looks much later. So it looks more like July and August, a more realistic start date for those particular cruise lines. Avalon at the moment is the only cruise line that's included vaccines specifically, so they've given an opportunity, if you want to go cruising with them, to either have a negative test or, for example, to have a vaccination or to be a recent recoverer from COVID with proof that you have immunity of some kind. What all of those lines are saying is they're already seeing travelers shifting their bookings to past August. And I would recommend, if you do have a river cruise booking, I would push it to August and beyond. Despite saying all of that, there is a third really important thing to note when it comes to river cruising. So unlike ocean cruising, the river cruise lines are able to turn on cruising relatively quickly. So some of the cruise lines are saying they can do it within days, but it's probably more like a week or 2 or 3 weeks. And why is that? Well, first of all, staffing is all local, so they don't have to worry about bringing staff from all around the world. Staff is local, the supply chain is local, they restock the ships very frequently and in local ports. They don't have all the port infrastructure. And also importantly, all of their ships are laid up as they always are for the winter, but they have a lot of experience at taking ships out of cold layup and getting them back into service very quickly, because they do it every single year. So the lead time to start cruising is very quick. So once things start to move, once things start to lift, they will be able to turn it on really quickly. So really important, stay flexible, because if river cruising does open, if travel does open, they will put stuff on sale, and I'm sure there'll be lots of opportunities and maybe some sharp deals and opportunities to get cruising. So stay flexible. There is one really big unknown still though, which is around what travel restrictions will be put in place by local authorities as the season starts, as it begins. So for example, in 2020, you found some cruises only really were able to sail within Germany, or they had problems with cruises in Portugal because it did include stops in Spain, and Spain had some restrictions on which nationalities could come in and out. So one of the uncertainties with the river cruises is, will they be able to run the actual itineraries as currently scheduled? So certainly if you are booking early on in the season, bear in mind that you may not actually get to do the actual itinerary that you're hoping to book. Again, another reason for pushing things later, because the cruise lines are saying they just don't know what those restrictions may be. The other thing that people ask me as we look at an update on river cruising is, what about all the protocols? So certainly all the cruise lines are saying they're expecting the protocols that they put in place already will continue to be in place during 2021. So that means lower capacity on all the ships, so sailing with much fewer passengers. There'll be some kind of health screening before boarding the ship. There will be mask wearing, because that is still a requirement in all the places, in all the countries. Until that gets lifted in those countries, it will stay. They have things like one-way systems. There's no buffets at all. It's all served. Of course, the cruise lines have line excursions anyway. However, you would be able to go out and tour on your own if that is basically what you can do anyway as an independent tourist. But they will be encouraging you to stick with the line excursions, fewer people on each of the excursions. There'll be staggered dining, so much more limits around who you can dine with and when you can dine. There'll be, of course, lots of cleaning, daily temperature checks. Your luggage all gets sprayed and cleaned and so on and so forth. So all of those kind of protocols will remain in place, certainly until they get lifted in the countries themselves, because again, river cruises do tend to follow the local rules, particularly things around mask wearing, and pretty much what you would have to do in a hotel stay, you're going to have to do on a river cruise in Europe. In the US, the American Steamboat Company has already announced they're going to require vaccines for both crew and guests from July. They're hoping to start in April, May without it. The river cruises that go to through the Great Lakes and into Canada, they're all uncertain because of the Canada rules. In terms of the Mekong, it's not looking very promising at all in that area, because in Myanmar, there's no signs there'll be Irrawaddy cruises because of the coup there. Both in Vietnam and Cambodia, with all the restrictions on travel, it looks like that key sort of March, April to September period is not going to happen. In Africa, the Nile, they're hoping they can open that later in the year. So pretty much river cruising is looking a little bit like ocean cruising in terms of uncertainty. However, certainly in Europe, we are likely to see river cruises start sailing relatively early as we head into summer for European guests only. When it comes to international guests, we're talking much later in the year, and it all hinges around the role of vaccines, the role of passports to come into countries, and basically travel opening up, and very importantly, countries individually lifting the ban on river cruising. Hopefully you found this interesting and helpful. Remember, I have hundreds more of Tips for Travelers episodes packed full of cruising updates, tips and advice, so why not watch another one right now?